Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Public Sector Group Monthly. Today we are very pleased to welcome Alan Shipman, who is a regular contributor to IRMS Public Sector, and he's going to be talking to us about legal admissibility. But just a few bits of housekeeping before we start. If you have any questions, can you please put them in the chat or in the questions box? Alan can actually see the questions in the chat, and he will answer those as he goes along. The recording will be available once the e-group have had chance to do whatever technical wizardry they do with it to make it available via the IRMS YouTube, and we will also be making the slides available. Just sort of the normal thing that I say, that I know I don't have to say this really to you as professionals, but if we can keep the chat healthy and constructive, please, so that everyone gets the most they can out of the session. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Alan to take us through the next hour. So the stage is yours, Alan.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the invitation. I hope this session will be useful, and I hope I don't get anybody delivering parcels to my house or anything like that to interrupt us as we go. Nothing is expected. So, legal admissibility and a good old British standard on this topic. So, what are we going to talk about today? Obviously, the main topic, evidential weight and legal admissibility of electronically stored information. What are its objectives? What's included and what's not included in the document, in the standard itself. Yep, we managed to get a new version out last year. What's different? What's been added to that? And why on earth should anybody bother with it? What are the benefits of actually dealing with it? That's what I'm going to be talking about, and I'll try and pick up any questions we get as we go through it. Now, what I normally do here, because as you can probably imagine, I've done this session a couple of times before. I ask people whether their electronic information is legally admissible, and I get various answers: yes, no, and don't know. The truth of the matter is that the last of those, the don't know, is actually the right answer. If you go through the process, you will discover that the only person that can actually grant legal admissibility is the judge at the actual case itself. It's up to the judge to decide whether to accept or reject any evidence that is put to that particular court. Obviously, they normally accept everything, but there have been occasions where some evidence submitted is rejected by the court, by the judge. So legal admissibility is the phrase we all know about and we all use, but it's actually the wrong phrase. And this is why the title of 10,008 now includes the words evidential weight. We have some evidence, and in our case, that's usually documentary evidence. How do we go about demonstrating that it's authentic, that we can trust it, that we know when we got it and where we got it from? So those are the questions that we try to address in 10,008. Can we trust our electronically stored information? So The objectives of 10,008 is to give you a standard which, if you follow it, it will assist you to improve the reliability of your electronically stored information, or ESI for short. So how do we go about doing that? What do we need to do? How do we maximize the evidential weight of our electronically stored information? And good afternoon, Tony. How do we enable other organisations that are trading with us, that are interacting with us, to trust the information that we hold? How do external inspectors, those nice regulators, those auditors that will come and check what we're doing, how do we demonstrate to them that they can trust all the information that we are presenting to them? How can they be confident in what we're doing? Those are the objectives of the British Standard. So I guess, how do we go about dealing with that? Well, I remember years and years ago, in fact 1993, that question was beginning to be asked. And so a group of people, and I think in the end, the count of the number of either individuals or organisations involved was over 100. They all worked together to put together what was originally a BSI Code of Practice as a published document, number 8, which was first published in 1996. So yes, it's been going on for a long time. It's been widely referenced, it's been widely used. And one example of it being referenced, the Section 46 Code of Practice under FOI recommends using the Code of Practice. Nobody ever actually says you are required to do it. And that's not how standards work. I can recommend you do it. And if you do it, hopefully you gain an advantage. So yeah, originally published in 1996, and we're now on our 6th edition. The 2020 version is actually the 6th edition of what was originally a published document and is now a full British Standard specification. And as you can see there are actually now 3 documents in the 6th edition. One is the standard itself, which is a relatively short document and includes lots of you shall do thises and you shall do that's and you shall do something else's. Those of you that have been aware of this for some while will remember there were additional documents published to help people implement the standard. Those have now all been integrated into what's now part 2 of the British Standard, which is actually quite a big document. It's a few hundred pages. It's a code of practice and it gives guidance on how to implement the standard. And there's a one-to-one relationship between parts 1 and parts 2. The document, the section numbering is exactly the same in both documents. And finally, if you've decided, yep, we're going to do it, and you want to check whether you are doing it, then there's what used to be the compliance workbook. It's now called a compliance checklist. It's bit 0009, and is now published as a PDF that you can complete, so you can tick little boxes as you go through the checklist saying, yeah, we do that, and here's the evidence, or no, we don't do that, and either this is why we don't do it, or oh dear, perhaps we need to go away and do it. So the current portfolio has 3 different parts which you can purchase either independently or as a group. So that's what we now have. From the work I've been doing with assisting organisations with using the standard, the main application has been related to document scanning projects. And the real question that arises in most document scanning projects is, once we've scanned a piece of paper and we have nice images, do we really need to keep the original document? Can we get rid of the paper? Because obviously there are savings to be made in getting rid of the paper. So this is one of the big questions that the standard has been used to assist with. And currently I'm aware of quite a lot of projects in the health service where they're scanning patient records and asking the question, do we need to keep those original records? So document scanning is one of the major benefits, and there's a lot of guidance in there. There's a lot of guidance on how to scan things well, how to be able to demonstrate that your scanned images are a true copy of the original pieces of paper. How do you demonstrate that you have actually scanned every piece of paper, which is actually quite a challenge. How do you go about doing that? And answering, well, not answering the question, can the original documents be destroyed? Because that is up to the organisation. But it is basically a risk management process. We believe we can prove that our images are true copies of the paper originals. Hence, why do we need to keep the paper? No doubt there are some people that says, oh, but we are required to keep the paper because of such and such and such and such. And almost every time I ask for evidence that the original document is required, I find that actually that cannot be provided. It is actually quite rare for you to need to retain the original document. There may be contractual requirements, but again, you'll find in practice they're quite rare. But of course, what we're saying is that you may not be able to destroy every document. I remember talking to the National Archives where they scanned the Magna Carta and they had decided not to destroy the original document, which is obviously quite appropriate. I'm just looking at a question that's come through. We're looking at scanning deeds and agreements, and that is one they say need to be kept. Have a look behind that and try and find out where is either the law, the regulation or whatever that says you need to retain the originals. Quite often it's something that's always been done, and sometimes you want to do it because they are nice documents Yep, seals on deeds. But again, if you can demonstrate that a deed has been sealed by showing an image of it, then you have the evidence that that deed was sealed. Do you actually need the seal itself? Exactly the same question is asked around ink signatures. Do you really need the original ink signature? Or actually, if you have a picture of that signature, then you know that it was signed. It's all a question of evidence, and of course it's a question of benefits. Yeah, ink signatures, there we go. It's a question I've been asked many, many times, and in most cases, all actually you need to do is to be able to demonstrate that, yes, that was signed. I did, and I've quoted this example before, have an instance where an organisation said, no, we need to keep all the original pieces of paper. And this was a case of a solicitor's office where they'd had an instance where somebody had said, I did not sign that piece of paper, but that person's signature was on that piece of paper. Yeah, the signature looked like it was authentic, but the person said he did not sign it. What they found was his fingerprint on the piece of paper. That tended to cause him a problem. Obviously, that example is extremely rare, but that solicitor's office then decided to keep all original pieces of paper in case they need to check them for fingerprints. You're right, losing the paper loses the fingerprint. In your case, in your instance, does that really matter? So, and yes, electronic signatures are very much covered in the 2020 update. In fact, I think they were covered in the previous one. Excuse me. Quick drink. So, moving on, and I suspect we may get one or two more questions on that topic. I've been talking about scanning and using the standard for demonstrating that images are authentic. But the standard also covers many, many other things. Most information, most documents these days are created electronically. And we have enormous stores of electronic information. You can use the standard to help you demonstrate that you can trust all that information. It's not just about images. What about information in databases? Databases that are dynamic and updated very frequently. How do you go about demonstrating authenticity of information in a database? How do you go about demonstrating who changed what and when in a database? All that is covered in the standard. What about capture of information from mobile phones, etc., etc.? That is covered, the capture of information from mobile devices. What happens if you use another organisation to help you with your records management? All of that is covered in the standard. And what happens if you exchange information between organisations? And let's just take a very simple route of an email. We all receive emails. Do we trust them? Do we know where they come from? Do we know they've been received correctly? Etc., etc. So electronic transfers of information between organisations, all that is covered in the standard. So obviously, as you can see, there's a pretty wide applicability of what we're talking about. I said I'd cover what's new in the 2020 version. And the first thing I will say is that nothing in the previous version has actually been changed. No advice has been changed. So if you were using a previous version, you can be assured that the new version is asking you to do all the same things. We've just added other topics to the document. And we all know an awful lot these days about blockchain technology. It has its challenges, it has many challenges, but organisations are beginning to use that technology. How do you trust the information stored in a blockchain? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Also, document marking systems. Those people in government will be used to putting things like secret, top secret, etc. on documents. How do we go about managing that? Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. IoT systems, they're becoming more and more applicable, more and more appropriate. How do we trust the information that is coming in from those systems? Things like CCTV, traffic cams, IoT, Internet of Things. So this is when your fridge sends a message to your supermarket saying, we are short of milk, please deliver me some more. Again, I've got a little bit on the next but one slide on that. Information is gathered from traffic cams these days. How do you manage information coming from those things? Thanks for the link, Tony. Very useful. We've reviewed the text on scanning. Again, I say we've not changed anything. We've added a bit more guidance into that area. We all know that risk management is becoming more and more important these days. And so we've looked at the text we used to have in that area, and we've revised that, updated all of that. And we also know that the International Standard on Records Management, ISO 15489, has been updated, and so we've updated the links into that standard, because obviously there is a very close tie between 10,008 and records management. So those are the new topics in the 2020 version. Oh, I'm going to go back one because, oh, wrong way, sorry. I'm going to go back to that because, in fact, in the slide deck you'll see there is more information on blockchain and IoT systems, but I've hidden that because I didn't think I'd have time to go through them in detail. But just a little more on blockchain, and as you can imagine, there's an awful lot of work going on, particularly in the standards arena around the management of blockchain technologies. And we all know that one of the challenges with blockchain is that it is not possible to delete anything that's held in a blockchain. So we are told deletion is impossible. Therefore, how on earth can you store a record which has a finite retention period in blockchain? And remember, we're not necessarily talking about documents here, we're just talking about data that we see as an important record. And I guess you could add to that where we're talking about personal information. Personal information has a finite life. So how do you go about storing personal information within blockchain? And there's lots of work going on about saying, well, no, you don't store the personal information in the blockchain itself. You just store a link to the personal information in the blockchain. So there's a lot of talk about records associated with blockchain data. There's also lots of discussions on how long will a blockchain last. Most blockchain systems are managed by third parties, and they don't say, oh yeah, this will remain current technology forever. There will be an end to the blockchain at some point in time, and that's likely to be before the end of our life of our information. So how do we go about managing that sort of thing? How do we deal with contracts in that case? I also said I'd talk a little bit more about document marking. This is where you classify your documents, and as I said before, many government departments do this automatically, but this is actually quite rare in the private sector. So a couple of years ago, BS 10010 was published, which talks about how you go about implementing a document marking system. And you might mark documents with security classifications, with record classifications, or any other type of classification. It's not just specifically for security classification. So how do you mark a document? How do you manage that mark? How do you handle a document that has a particular marking? If you receive a document from another organization that has been marked, how do you manage that? All of that is covered in 10010, and I would recommend, if you are looking in that area, to using that standard. We certainly reference it in 10008. So that is what is new, and I'm rapidly running through this presentation. There are far less questions, but I'm not complaining about that. Let me just have a quick look. No, nothing in the questions box. Everything is in the chats box, which is good. So, if what I've been talking about, you think, oh, haven't heard about that before, perhaps we need to do something about that, or maybe you have heard about it before and have not actually gone about trying to implement it. What are the things that it really needs you to do in order to be able to say, yeah, we are implementing the legal admissibility standard? Well, the first thing you need is an organisational policy that says this is what we're going to do. That's important because it means you will get those people that are responsible for that policy to be involved in the decision to go ahead, and then hopefully give you the resources to do it. It needs you, and this is perhaps the boring part, the tedious part, it needs you to write down what people do. What are the procedures? How do you go about doing it? How do you go about, just to take the example I talked about before, how do you go about scanning a document? What are your preparation procedures? What are your scanning procedures? What are your quality control procedures? It asks you to write those, or it requires you to write down those procedures. And really, there are a couple of reasons for wanting people to do that. Writing down what you do does formalise what you do, and it makes people think about what they're doing and think about, are they doing it the right way? And is somebody else doing it a different way? Is my next door neighbour in my office doing the same procedure but actually doing it a slightly different way? It gets those issues discussed, talked about and written down. It's also extremely useful, bearing in mind the fact that our information is often retained for many, many years. And so you may be presenting the records that you are creating today, may be presenting those to court in 20, 30 years' time. What were the procedures when we captured that information? What were our historic procedures? We won't remember, they will have changed. If you don't have them documented, you cannot respond to that question, which obviously then reduces the evidential weight of that information. The next thing you need to do is to make sure you have all the correct roles and responsibilities. Who's responsible for doing what? And that includes who is responsible for checking compliance. Because again, this is a long-term issue. It's not something that you set up now and then forget about. It's something you need to continue to do throughout the whole lifetime of a particular document. Excuse me again. So those are the main issues around how you go about demonstrating compliance. So I have gone through this very, very quick. I don't see any more. I see Elizabeth trying to prompt people to ask questions. I don't know whether we want to suggest if anybody wants to ask a question verbally, whether that may be easier for people, but we certainly have plenty of time to do that. So, as a conclusion, but I hope we can go on for a little bit longer. 10,008 helps you demonstrate whether your electronic information is authentic, whether you can demonstrate its integrity, who's looked after it, and whether those processes can be audited. And it supports the use of information as evidence. And there's that wonderful statement: enables an organisation to trust it's reliant upon electronic information management systems and processes and maximise their benefits. So, I hear Elizabeth.
Yeah, sorry, you hear my heavy breathing again. Tria's just put in the chat, if there's time, could you delve a bit deeper into what the standard says about electronic signatures?
Sure, certainly can do that. And perhaps I go back to, well, what is a signature? What is it? What does it mean? Does a cross in a box mean a signature? And potentially the answer is yes. What does a signature actually do? Well, I think it does two things. It says, yes, I have seen this document and I approve it. And in fact, those are the two things. Have I seen it? Sign here. Do I agree with its content? Sign here. So a signature, if you like, authorises a particular document. Now, historically, yes, that's been done by a wet signature, and I know is still done in many cases by an electronic signature. Sorry, but by a wet signature. And the electronic signature, it actually does the same thing, you hope. And you hope is the important thing here. If you look at electronic signatures, they can be of many types. And we've seen, perhaps those of us that have had parcels delivered over the last few months, quite often the person that's delivering it will give us a handheld device and that we wiggle something on it. That is an electronic signature, because that is you writing on a device that says, yes, I have received that parcel. And there's a big issue around the trust of that electronic signature. Does anybody actually check back in the delivery office that, was that the right signature? I mean, often you find you cannot actually do a signature on those pads. It's really difficult. But it's part of their process that says, I want the person that's receiving something to do something to say they've received it. So signatures, they can also be on a computer system. They could just be an image of your paper signature that you attach, you add on to a document. That is an electronic signature. Similarly, there are many, many systems around which will add some code to your document that another system will decode and say, oh yeah, that person has actually signed it. So the question on all of those is, do you trust that I'm going to call it a mark put on that electronic document was actually put on by the individual that is claimed? So this is all around your computer systems, your IT systems, the security around them. Who has done what? Do you know that only that person, the named person, could have applied that signature? Or could he have walked away from his desk, leaving his computer on, and somebody else actually put that signature on, who has access to that? And that's what 10,008 talks about. Electronic signatures are in most cases perfectly valid. Any type that I've talked about is an electronic signature. The question is, how do you go about trusting that it was actually that person? In exactly the same way is on a wet signature, how do you know that it was that person that signed that and it wasn't somebody else spoofing that signature? So it's, if you like, it's all of the same questions, but applied to an electronic environment. So hopefully that's answered Clear's question on electronic signatures. Is it gone as well?
I was going to say the questions are coming in thick and fast now. So can you actually see? So we've got Tony, Karen, and Geraldine who've all put questions in. Do you need me? Yeah, you can see those.
I can see them. Yeah. So Tony's question on mixed environment. One of the things you do at the very beginning of implementing 10,008 is to say, well, which of our processes are we going to apply this to? You could just decide, because we all have mixed environments, you could just decide on, no, I'm only going to implement it on perhaps the scanning project, or there's that particular department that we're going to implement their systems on. It's really up to you to decide the scope, which procedures, which systems you're going to include in your 10,008 project. So I don't see any barriers in that area. Next one from Karen is on outsourcing. And this is a good question, because yes, I've seen many instances where an organization says, oh yeah, we're going to do a scanning project and we're going to get such and such a company to do the scanning for us, and they are 10,008 compliant, so we're okay, aren't we? Well, the answer to that is you're okay until you store those images on your own system. Because if your own system for storing the images are not 10,008 compliant, how do you go about demonstrating that they've not been changed, lost, stolen, whatever? It's, as I said originally, it's a long-term issue. Yes, you know you are getting good images back from your third party, but then you have to look after them for the rest of their life with you. So that is how I would respond to Karen's question. Geraldine is just starting a digitization project, and we need to get a company on board. I would certainly ask are you 10,008 compliant? And no, there is no list of companies that are 100,008 compliant. I love the typo, thank you. We do not, nobody keeps a list. There's also, by the way, no formal compliance process, and I'm talking about formal processes like what there is for ISO 9000, the quality management standard. So most of the compliance claims are informal. Yes, organisations can get people in to have a look at their systems and say whether they are compliant or not, and that's what most people tend to do. Are they more expensive? Is always a good question. And the answer to that is possibly, but then a question would be, if they are not scanning to 10,008, what are they doing wrong? Can you really trust them? What does it cost to trust people? And in fact, what I would often do is say, well, the quality checking that you need to do when you receive images is much less if you're dealing with a bureau that is 10,008 compliant. Do not assume that when paper is scanned and images come in, you just import them. You need to check, because they're your documents, you need to check that they've been done correctly, they've been done properly. And I would suggest that the amount of checking you have to do is less with a 10,008 compliant bureau. That would be my answer. Do you know how widely public sector organisations? Well, again, there's no particular list of organisations that use 10,008. I do know from my own consultancy work, currently there are many NHS trusts that are using 10,008. And yeah, I've been through many different organisations, public sector organisations that do use it. No, I'm sorry, there is no list. I hear from BSI that they like 10,008 because a lot of people buy it. Whether that's a good response to that, I don't know. No, there is no list. Organisations do not have to own up to complying with 10,008. We've just completed a digitalisation project, including a tender process. If you'd like to contact me, I'm happy to share our processes. So there's Kathy offering to help people, which Geraldine has said thanks to. So we've got some work there. Okay, I think that's gone through all of the questions so far in the chat box. Lots of people offering help to other people.
So in response to Anne's question, with perhaps a quick show of hands in the chat, I think that's the only way we can do it in Livestorm. How many people are actually using BS 10,008 now? Because I know we're using it, but we're not seeking any form of sort of accreditation or compliance recognition. We just use it to inform our how we manage things. So we've got one there from Clear. So Sarah as well.
Are you able to set up a poll?
Sarah may be able to, but I'm not sure I can. I had a look at it because you know me in technology, Alan. I'd probably crash the whole thing very quickly. So.
Yeah.
Let me see what I can do. I'll pop a poll together.
Test the technology. Yeah, 26 people on, so it's presumably 26 public sector people. So it's perhaps I suspect it's are using it, have thought of using it, definitely don't want to use it.
I think, as I mentioned before we started, that actually it's very useful to have the standard, because when ICT colleagues start to question why you're saying, well, this is the best way forward, you can actually weigh the standard and say, well, this is what the British standard says, and I find that incredibly useful.
Mhm.
I know
There's a
we've
poll
certainly.
up.
Oh yeah, I popped a poll in there. I know
Got
we
it.
certainly have used it at NHS England Improvement. We've been working with NHSX around the Lloyd Georgeisation programme,
Okay.
and I know that in the specification for the tenders for that programme, that was quite prominent, that we wanted them to be compliant with this standard. So that's certainly part of the specification for tenders for those
Right.
roles.
Okay. Good. Good. I've not heard anybody say, no, we don't like it. We definitely.
I think it's a useful bridging tool to because it uses a language that our ICT colleagues understand, but it also lays out quite clearly what that ICT language means, and so it does form a useful bridge when you're talking to ICT colleagues about specs and that kind of thing. And I remember a conversation that we had at a similar session to this with Alan a number of years ago, when there was a lot of discussion about whether de-skewing represented changing the image, or whether if you clean up the background, and a lot of that went over my head at the time, but now actually it all makes a lot of sense. Do you leave the mottling in, or do you de-skew an image, and all those kinds of things? And I think it's
Sure.
very it is very useful. I mean, Alan probably remembers the conversation because it was a long debate, but yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, from my perspective, I think it's a bridging tool as well. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Sure.
yeah,
And yeah, how do evidence compliance is an interesting question. Yeah, and you're right. You ask for evidence. You ask for policies, procedures, etc. Absolutely. In fact, presumably in tenders, you have a right to audit the third party. So when you audit them, you can check that they're actually following the standard.
That's absolutely right, as you're saying there, Alan, because I know that with the tender process we've just undertaken, when they said, yes, we've got, we use the standard, and they would share that they were that standard, etc. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's good.
So the poll at the moment, we've had 13 votes, and it's 85% no and 15% yes.
Okay.
So I think that answers the.
Yeah.
Oh, so we've now had 14 votes, so it's now 79% no and 21% yes. But yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a pretty
Sure.
clear indication. I noticed that Geraldine has popped a question in the chat about how far BSI standards can be shared amongst colleagues.
Sure, and I know BSI are very restrictive about their copyright of their documents. So I think really this is a question for BSI, not really a question for me. I do know that BSI do have some sort of group subscription where an organisation effectively buys whatever they want, and they can share it around the whole organisation. One for one, I think you're right. There is a challenge there, but most of it actually now can be bought electronically as PDFs. So yeah. You're right. It is a challenge. BSI's copyright restrictions. we had a big discussion with them when we were talking about the paper version of the workbook, the compliance workbook, because it says in the workbook, it says on the copyright, you cannot scan this, but then the text says when you filled it in, scan it. And we had a long discussion with BSI on that. And the end result was, well, once you've filled it in, it's your document. And therefore, what you're scanning is your document. So that's fine. Okay.
Well, we are just about coming up to 4 minutes to 2, so
Yep.
I know that people will need to get on into their afternoon's activity.
Sure. There's one other thing I'd like to say. I'd like to make an announcement.
Would you like a drum roll?
You can do a drum roll if you like, but some of you may have seen in various IRMS documents mention of a new British standard on the management of records. So BS 10,025 is due to be published at the end of April. It's on schedule for that, and it is entitled Management of Records Code of Practice. And in many ways it's an update to the Lord Chancellor's Code of Practice under section 46. We started with that document, and we had discussions with the owners of that document that were happy for us to do that. So a new British standard on the management of records due for publication by the end of April. I hope you look forward to that.
Well, thank you, Alan. Yes, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
So thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us over the last hour, Alan. It's been very much appreciated. As I said at the beginning, Alan is a regular contributor to IRMS Public Sector, and we very much appreciate him taking time out to share his knowledge and expertise with us. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Sarah, as always, because without her technological wizardry, we probably wouldn't be able to get these live storm webinars up on and running in such an effective and efficient way. And I tend to be one of those people who press all the buttons until something works, and that's not usually the best approach to this kind of thing. So huge thank you to Sarah. Our next session will be in June. We won't be running webinars in April or May because we thought that conference would be taking place in May, and so therefore we are not permitted to organise events in the 6 weeks up to conference. So we've decided not to fill the April and May slots, but we will be looking at a different topic in June. So keep your eye on your on the IRMS communications, because we will obviously circulate information about that a little bit closer to the time. So I hope that everybody has a very pleasant afternoon. Thank you for all the brilliant feedback that's coming back on the chat. I hope that Alan can see that. I mean, Alan, I think Alan is always brilliant, so I'm not seeing anything that surprises me here, but yeah, that is absolutely superb. Thank you very much. So I hope you all have a pleasant afternoon, and hopefully we will all meet again in June. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan and Elizabeth. Thank you.
Cheers, bye. And I notice Keith is still very good at typing. I will respond separately to his question. The answer is no.
Thank you, folks.